Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program, and in today's Kerbal Space Program endeavor, we're going to be building a Stratolaunch satellite. In fact, I'm going to say the full name. It's a Supersonic Stratolaunching satellite carrying space plane. That's what we're doing in this video, if the title and thumbnail weren't obvious, which hopefully they were. Don't want to be the guy that clickbaits. Here you can see me in the spaceplane hangar constructing this thing. It's a somewhat complicated build. I would put this as an expert level build. We're going to be needing to use the offset tool, the rotation tool, all of the stuff we have available to us really in order to construct the spaceplane. So the first thing I'm doing is constructing the spaceplane itself that will carry everything to orbit. We'll then build the satellite inside its cargo bay, and then once that's done, we'll build the Stratolaunch aircraft around it. Now, I have built them before, but for those that don't know, a Stratolaunch aircraft is basically some sort of spacefaring payload. It doesn't necessarily have to be a space plane like I'm doing, but that's what the real-life example Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2 is. And it's suspended below a kind of catamaran-style twin fuselage aircraft. The two fuselages are connected by this kind of wing structure, and that's where the cargo hangs, sort of in between the two fuselages. That's what a Stratolaunch system is. The twist of this one is that it flies at supersonic speed, and it was suggested by a person on the internet. I apologize profusely. I have forgotten who suggested this, and I forgot to write it down when I saw it, but I remember seeing their comment and thinking, that's a cool idea. So if you made that suggestion, thank you for the suggestion. I'm sorry I am not able to give you due credit, but you know who you are, and it was a neat idea. So that's what we're doing in this mission today. One of the little fun twist I thought we could do is we'll be completely avoiding the Kerbal Space Center for the whole duration of this mission, really. I mean, obviously the exception is that we're going to be building it inside the spaceplane hangar of the Kerbal Space Center, but other than that, we're going to be launching it from the desert airfield and then landing it on the island runway, just to show off kind of the other two runways that exist in this game. Thought there might be a nice little spin on the mission. Here you can see me constructing the satellite. Well, actually, I guess the construction of the satellite is done, but there it is. You can see I've decided to have it deployed through that robotic hinge system, just so that it can be safely raised out of the cargo bay, because it nor the spaceplane, they don't have any sort of vertical movement control points to separate them safely. So by doing it this way, we can make sure it can definitely get clear, not going to bounce into the walls of the cargo bay upon deployment. And of course, by raising it out of the cargo bay doors like that, it gives us the opportunity to test the solar panels and the satellite dish to make sure they actually extend properly, which isn't really a thing we would need to worry about in Kerbal Space Program, but if this were a real-world mission, it would be kind of useful to make sure they do work and don't fail before we deploy them. We can actually just, if they don't work, we can fold it back in, close the doors, and recover it back at the Space Center, fix it, and then try again. Another little useful feature of having that robot hinge there. As I mean, aside from obviously the robotic cargo bay, the cockpit of the spaceplane itself, you can see we've also got ample room for 4 more Kerbals. So we're going to take Jebediah and Bill or Bob. I can't remember which one I take, actually. I know we take Jebediah, but not sure who the other Kerbal is. But we're also going to take 4 tourists as well, because why not? We can make this both a cargo mission and a tourist mission. Partly because it's cool and it's something we can just do because we have the technology to do it. But also because it's kind of to pay tribute to the only real kind of working Stratolaunch system we have in this world, and that is the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2, which is a similar sort of system where it's a spaceplane that is launched from a Stratolaunch aircraft. Obviously, we also have Paul G. Allen's Stratolaunch Systems company, but unfortunately, with his passing, it's looking less and less likely that craft will ever actually be used. But in terms of size, this is much more akin to Spaceship 2 anyway, and obviously, Spaceship 2 is a tourist spaceplane. This is that too, but it can do, other things. So it's much better. And of course, it's a lot cooler because we'll be launching the spacecraft at supersonic speed, and much, much faster than supersonic speed. I think I aimed for 1,000 meters per second as the launch speed for the spaceplane, which actually came with a few unforeseen difficulties. I don't know why they were unforeseen. I should have foreseen them, but I did not. Such as, it's actually quite hard to separate the two craft safely at those sorts of speeds, so we had to overcome a few engineering challenges. You'll see some test flights with the initial prototype that I ended up having to upgrade in order to, not result in a fiery death for our Kerbals. Speaking of fiery deaths for our Kerbals, one of the major disadvantages of Stratolaunch systems, in stock KSP at least, I think there are mods that make them viable, but in stock KSP, they don't really work because you can't switch vessels in time. Once sort of ships have left physics range and one of them is in an atmosphere, you can't switch to it. The ship basically just is terminated. So when we launch the space plane, the actual Stratolaunch aircraft will unfortunately be lost. What I'll do to get around this problem, to showcase it in a video, is we'll create a quick save just before we deploy the spaceplane, get the spaceplane into orbit to complete its mission, and then we'll reload the quick save and then recover the Stratolaunch aircraft that way. This, of course, does mean that the 4 tourists won't survive the mission because it'll be Jebediah and Bob that will fly, or Jebediah and Bill, like I said, I can't remember which other Kerbal I put on this craft. They will be flying the Stratolaunch craft. I'll just switch them. I'll do an impossible IVA to get them into the Stratolaunch aircraft, but there won't be any space for the tourists. I probably should have added a passenger bay, to be honest, in the Stratolaunch craft, but you know, I'm not a miracle worker here. Sometimes I just have to accept sacrifices, even when there was a very easy and clear solution to the issue. Actually, just moving on to a previous topic, what I was saying earlier, I've just the thought has crossed my mind. I said that Stratolaunch vehicles aren't really viable in stock KSP, and that's not necessarily true. If you were to, say, make the Stratolaunch aircraft an expendable drone, like just put probe cores on it, and then just have it deploy like a normal stage, that in theory would be a practical use for a Stratolauncher in stock KSP. Or alternatively, if you just don't care about the lives of Kerbals, which I think is a sentiment shared by some players, then I guess you could use a setup like this and have a sort of kamikaze kind of type deal with your astronaut program. Here's a little test flight, by the way, of me trying to deploy the spacecraft for the first time. As you can see, at supersonic speeds, beyond supersonic speeds, let's face it. It's very difficult to separate the crafts. They ended up just sort of slamming together. I tried again, see if it was just that one-off launch, and I see again, it immediately wants to just slam straight up into the Stratolaunch aircraft. And this won't do, obviously. So I decided to add some Sepratron solid rocket motors to the airframe of the carrier aircraft so that it will actually launch it away from the space plane so we can get a safe separation of the two craft. That was my solution there. What I also did was I added some air brakes to the, again, to the carrier aircraft. And I'm not sure if I just did. I wasn't really watching the time-lapse very closely. But at some point, I'll create an action group. I think I bound it to action group 1. So when we press action group 1, a few things all happen at once automatically. The 3 jet engines of the carrier aircraft deactivate. The air brakes toggle. The Sepratron boosters fire. And the spaceplane drops. All happens in one go. And as you can see, with that little test there, it's separated beautifully. So that was my little solution. And I hope there's just an example of one of the little engineering things I have to overcome when designing craft. And I mean, engineering in the loosest sense of the word there. I think I switched out some of these fuel tanks on the side with orange ones just to have, a nice aesthetic. And actually, I didn't really talk about the design of the spaceplane at all. I didn't really put too much thought into it, to be honest. I don't know what engine. I think they're the Cheetah engines. They're best suited to low air pressure, so basically high altitude flight and vacuum flight, which is obviously the domain of this space plane here. There are probably more efficient solutions, like we probably only needed the one engine, but I liked the aesthetics of this. And here you can see me going to my Discord to try and find the tourists. So I went to the Kerbal chat section of the Discord to begin with. Turns out there are only 3 people here. We had Sheeps, Fresh Milky Milk 3, and John. And I waited for a bit, but nobody came. So I had to quickly go to a different channel in the Discord in order to get the name of the 4th and final tourist for this mission. So I basically going to take the username and then create a Kerbal with that username, set them to be a tourist, and that's how we're going to get... I feel like this is kind of a cool thing, actually. I might do this more often in going forward. I did this... Was it last video I did? I don't know. Quite recently I did this. Anyway, we have our 4th tourist. It's How Am I Supposed? was his Discord username. So we have Fresh Milky Milk 3, Kerman, Jules on Kerman, Sheeps Kerman, and How Am I Supposed Kerman. So there we are. That's you know, I didn't script that because I would have picked people with actual, real names. But there we are. They are now on board. I hope you guys that were selected enjoy the flight. The Discord is watching. I think maybe. So yeah, there we are. We got you can see which one is the custom. We got Jebediah Cohen, Bill Cohen. How am I supposed Cohen? I thought that the best name was Fresh Milky Milk 3. I like to think that he wanted the username Fresh Milky Milk, and it was taken. So okay, right, maybe Fresh Milky Milk 1 was taken. Oh, Fresh Milky Milk 2, and that was taken as well. But Fresh Milky Milk 3. So where are Fresh Milky Milk 1 and 2? Probably hanging out with the guy that knows Obama's last name. By the way, the ship has launched. Like I said, we were launching from the desert airfield. So, I mean, you probably would have gathered that without me needing to clarify it. But it's going to be a somewhat lazy flight as we ascend to altitude. As we ascend to a high altitude, which I arbitrarily selected as 10 kilometers. Slightly accidentally hit F just then, which is why the craft suddenly nosed forward. But we're back on track. I'm keeping a somewhat steady pace as we ascend through the atmosphere to get to 10 kilometers. Then we're going to basically start flying flat, prograde, to pick up as much speed as we can. I set, again, another arbitrary figure of about 1,000 meters per second I was aiming for, and we would continue accelerating from the 10 kilometer point up until about 20 kilometers. Again, another random figure I just picked. That'll be the altitude we will launch the spacecraft. It's going to be epic, guys. Stay tuned. Lots of twists and turns. Hey, whilst we're not doing anything, why not consider subscribing to the channel? Because I get very lonely. I like pretending that I have friends. So do consider it if you enjoy this video. And of course, if you'd like to leave a like, then you can. It is current year. We have the technology. Are we nearly there yet? I've kind of lost track of what I was talking about. Ah, yes, we are approaching launch altitude, or as in, launch of the spaceplane altitude. And as you can see, we are now kind of reaching that point, so I'm going to create a quick save, and we can reload that quick save once we've completed the spaceplane part of the mission, which is now underway. We have a beautiful separation of the spaceplane from its carrier aircraft. Jebediah and Bill are definitely still here. I didn't accidentally launch them inside the carrier aircraft instead of the spaceplane. And there it goes. You can see it disappear. F's in chat all around for the carrier craft. We will go back and do that part of the mission again at some point, but that will then, of course, lead to the loss of the spaceplane. So it's in a way, this mission was a big sad. This mission was a big sad. Anyway, we have now finished ascending through the thicker parts of the atmosphere, so I can stop having to focus too much of our energy on vertical ascension and instead focus it entirely on horizontal speed gains. Gain spelled with a Z there, of course, as I'm sure NASA would spell it. And now we have an apoapsis that's out of the atmospheric line and a pretty high periapsis as well. Like, I know it's a negative value, but it's going to be a very, very short burn in order to circularize. And this is where I'm going to include a quick tip that Discord user Nodnum, who told me about a feature of the game I didn't know existed. So I always say that in order to work out when to start your burn, you take your estimated burn time, cut it in half, and then when your node in T is that value, that's when you start burning. Apparently this feature actually exists in the game. You go into the game settings here and you tick extended burn indicator, and it sets it to tell you when to start burning in game, and it defaults to the 50% of the estimated burn time, which is what I usually recommend. So there you are. There's a great feature. Thank you, Discord user Nodnum, for the tip. And you can see me executing this burn using that extended burn indicator feature of the game. I'm surprised that's not, enabled by default. It tells you when to start burning, which is more useful to beginners than it is to people who have got familiar with the game and are more comfortable exploring the game settings. I don't know. It's one of those things that that should probably be enabled by default. Squad, if you're watching this video, there you are. There's my 2 cents. Whilst I've got you, I have a few more things I would like you to include in this game. First of all, I would like a giant banner that says subscribe to Matt Lowne when you turn the game on. In addition to this, I also think it'd be good if we could toggle the contents of tanks. So you have a button that toggles the tank to be either liquid fuel only, liquid fuel and oxidizer, oxidizer, monopropellant, I don't know, possibly xeon as well. This not only means that we don't need multiple duplicates of the same tank cluttering up the builder UI, but it also means that we're not restricted when it comes to building nuclear ships and stuff that only need, at the moment, nuclear craft need to use aircraft parts to get the most fuel, because those are the ones that are just liquid fuel only, aside from obviously the one liquid fuel only Mark 1 tank. Furthermore, can we have folders in the menu for saving ships, like in the Spaceplane Hangar? I would like to be able to organize my crafts into folders, like rovers, shuttles, LKO SSTOs, right? Rather than just having a massive list. What else is there? I'd like service bays to be merged when you stack them in a line, so you just get a really long service bay. And that could also be extended to fuel tanks, I guess, as well. That'd be a great one to add. Also, something like a docking port, some sort of docking port liner would be great, rather than just having to eyeball it. By the way, Jebediah is just waving to the tourists. I probably should have thought of a list before I started rambling about ideas for the game. Maybe I should make a KSP 2 wish list video. I probably won't, but I will promise it nonetheless, and then subsequently fail to deliver, because that's the kind of quality content that you get on this channel. Speaking of quality content, please do check out my Instagram in the description. No, I was actually going to say... actually, no, do check out my Instagram. There's a great picture. We'll talk about that in a second, actually. But no, there is a new video on my second channel. So I think you'll like it. It's a top tier meme. What I just did there, you may blink and you may have missed it, but I edited the action groups just then because I accidentally deployed the rear parachute. So that means that I could disarm it, but then to redeploy it, I would have to right-click it and press deploy, which is not great when you're in the heat of the moment landing. Luckily, with one of the latest KSP updates, we can now edit action groups in flight, so I can now assign it to just the stage action group, so spacebar. So it's now kind of rebound to as a keyboard shortcut. There we are. Now, I'm going to be aiming for the island runway, like I said, and it's going to be a bit tricky because we're on a polar orbit, but it's not going to be too bad. This thing being an aircraft can do some steering once we enter into atmosphere that's thick enough to be steered in, because obviously we've got basically no fuel left and the cheater engines don't really work in thick atmospheres either. We're going to have to do some gliding, so once we start slowing down, we're going to have to start steering, in this case left, towards the runway, and it was fine. And you can pretty much get to any point on Kerbin from any angle of orbit by steering a spaceplane this way. It's a bit tricky with a rocket, but it is still doable. But obviously equatorial orbits are ideal for rockets, but spaceplanes, not a problem. I feel like the footage kind of does a better job of explaining things than just me saying it would. So there you go. Hope that was helpful. This wasn't really going to be a tutorial on how to land on the runway, so, I don't know why I'm continuing to drag on this point, because that part of the mission is now over. It's done. It's rewind time. We're going to now... I just want to prove that the Stratolaunch aircraft can be recovered, and it does fly without the ballast of the spaceplane. Keeping it steady. So there's the spaceplane. Goodbye, Fresh Milky Milk 3, whatever his name was. Jaws of... How am I supposed to... And... Sheeps. Get F in chats all around once again. I probably got their names wrong, but it doesn't matter. They're dead now. So it's time to just switch. Got pretty dark for a second. It's time to try and switch back around and target the desert airfield. You can basically select it on the map screen. Just try and find it. Sometimes it's difficult if you've got cloud mods like me, but you can try and find it buried under the cloud layer. Right-click it and press Activate Navigation, and as you can see, it comes with a little small building on the nav ball that you can just point yourself towards. Obviously, our payload is significantly lightened now that we've ditched the space plane, and of course, we don't really need to achieve supersonic speeds anymore because all we're doing is cruising back to the runway strip, so we can just save on fuel, save on, I don't know, aerodynamic stress on the airframe itself, and just maintain flight with a single jet engine. Basically just coast our way back. I'm playing the footage back pretty fast because it's not the most enthralling thing to watch, but I'm just showing you that it has the range to return back to the runway without the need for, I don't know, tomfoolery or any, otherwise illegitimate means of getting a craft back to a runway, which admittedly is not a particularly difficult feat, and you've already seen this thing can fly reasonably well. So I don't really know why I felt the need to justify this. I just wanted to do this for the sake of, having a complete mission. But of course, the landing of this thing doesn't actually complete the mission. That's right, we're doing a Return of the King style ending where the video just doesn't end. Because of course we still haven't done anything with the satellite in orbit, so we're going to have to do something with that. Don't worry, that'll be a very quick part of the video. But I think I have some time to quickly elaborate on a point that I raised earlier on but then never finished about my latest Instagram post. I bought a bottle of Maker's Mark whiskey and it came with a nice little jumper and it fit perfectly on my Kerbal plushie and it looked pretty adorable. Which of course segues us into the copper compliant section of my Kerbal Space Program videos. Matt reviews whiskies. Today's whiskey is Jack Daniel's Old Number 7. A classic whiskey. It tastes of make the sadness go away. It has helped me through many Kerbal missions in my time. And it is sold at the shop at the end of my road. And that makes it good. The only other whiskey they have is Glendew, which is bad. It's bad whiskey. And Southern Comfort, which I don't like because it's got sweetening in it. So it's Jack Daniel's. And you know, when I want some whiskey and have some whiskey, I can acquire some whiskey in a matter of minutes from the shop at the end of my road. So thank you, round of applause to the shop at the end of my road for carrying Jack Daniel's Old Number 7. And thus concludes, it wasn't really a review, I was basically just saying it helps me forget the sadness, which is a really legitimate review, I think. Anyway, this video is compliant now with copper. If you're under 13, you shouldn't be watching this video, because this is, first and foremost, a whiskey review series. We also talk about Kerbal Space Program a bit, but it's not the focus of the video. Anyway, my actual review of Jack Daniel's got a bit of a sour taste to it, but it's a pretty good, cheaper bourbon nonetheless. I would give it 70%. And thus concludes this video, which was about whiskey all along.